Not too long ago, I had my friend Jessica covering up Jenson Button's championship season in the glamorous world of Formula One, which was his 2009 season for those wondering if you're new to the sport of Formula One. At the very end of that particular video, she also briefly touched on the part where Jenson was one of the 5 drivers having a shot at the 2010 championship, but lost out. But as you can tell, and as you can read by the title of this presentation and the thumbnail of this presentation, Jenson's 2010 season is not what I'm here to discuss. That's a story for another time. For now, and for today's presentation, skipping 2010 for now, we will touch on Jenson's stellar 2011 season, which was, aka, his second season in McLaren colors. However, before we travel back into memory lane, especially to those who were watching Formula 1 in 2011, if you're liking what you're seeing thus far, hit that red subscribe button and all that jazz. That's all I'm going to say, considering it's cliche at this rate, saying the same thing over and over again as far as saying, hit that red subscribe button, blah blah blah, yada 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 yada. Enough of that, we're just going to jump straight into it. So, with that being said, let's begin. First things first, we gotta touch on the car, aka the beautiful, eye-catching McLaren MP4 26. Though with all Formula 1 cars made and produced comes production flaws. In this case, regarding McLaren, the exhaust kept malfunctioning during preseason testing and were off the mark from where Red Bull was, given the RB7 that Red Bull produced was an absolute monster. An absolute rocket ship of a car. And right from the off, Red Bull picked up right where they pretty much left off from their championship winning season in 2010, when they used the RB6 that year. And for McLaren, given their preseason testing results, you would think they would be off the pace for the 2011 season, right? Turns out, with improvements made on the exhaust, side pods being shaped in an L or a U to provide airflow to the upside of the rear diffuser, the reintroduction of KERS, aka Kinetic Energy Recovery System, new rear pull rod suspension, an intake to cool down the gearbox, as well as the hydraulics, among numerous other factors on the technical specs of the race car, McLaren, with their MP426, had quite arguably the second fastest car of the bunch on the grid. In the case of Jenson Button, he was the more consistent driver driving the MP426, comparing the numbers to his teammate, Lewis Hamilton. Now then, we go into the first race of the season, which is Melbourne, a place where Jenson is no stranger on the podium when recalling his last 2 victories in the Australian Grand Prix, winning back-to-back 2009 and 2010. But in this case, Jenson finished P6. Could have been higher than that, give or take, 4th place or maybe even a podium had he not cut the corner in turn 12 due to corner cutting with having to scrap with Felipe Massa. Button was handed a drive-through penalty as a consequence. Though the drive-through penalty, it slipped him down the order a bit, but despite that, he worked his way up through the field still en route to P6. And ahead of Felipe Massa too, who forced, again like I mentioned earlier, Button to cut turn 12 in the first place, given he left the McLaren next to no room in the inside line, leaving Button no other choice but to take the shortcut. But got past the Brazilian either way, and either way started off the good note to kick off his 2011 bid for the title run in the McLaren. Round 2 then in Sepang. Button had a quiet Malaysian Grand Prix going for him, and for the most part was chilling in the points position. That's where he'd finish at the end of the day, and with a runners-up spot behind the race winner, Sebastian Vettel. Then we go to Shanghai for the Chinese Grand Prix, where Button, during one of the pit stops, boxed in the wrong place. Stopped in the Red Bull box for a second before going into his proper box. Yet, putting that mistake to the side, still was able to put up a fight with Hamilton. And at the end, Hamilton won that fight, running off with the win. First of 2011. Second in China. For Button, he again had to put up a fight with Felipe Massa, but this time around, it was much more straightforward. But regardless, wheeled his McLaren home to P4, exactly 10 seconds behind Hamilton at the line. Then, in Turkey, JB started 6th and, well, finished 6th. Again, could have been higher than that if it wasn't for a delay in the pit stop with the left rear, which obviously costed him crucial time. Button, who was on a 3-stop, you compare that to his teammate Hamilton, Hamilton was on a 4-stop strategy. Button on a 3-stop, Hamilton on a 4-stop. In Button's case, he struggled to get the grips with the Pirelli tire compounds. But at least Button did lead for a brief period of time in the Turkish Grand Prix. But again, the race result could have been slightly better than where he started/finished. Onwards to the Spanish Grand Prix now, which is in Barcelona. Button, who started 5th on the grid, fell asleep at lights out. Not literally, but lost 5 places on the first lap in just a span of 3 turns. But as the latter stages went on, Button, who was on a 3-stopper, much like the plan in the previous round in Turkey, but in this instance, Button made his Pirellis work throughout the entire race, on his way to the podium in 3rd place, albeit over 35.5 seconds behind the 2 leaders of Hamilton and Vettel. This brings us to the Monaco Grand Prix now, where the front-running cars of Vettel and Alonso were nip and tuck, Jenson Button included. The top 3 became even more close when they had to get around a train of cars in front of them that were on the verge of being a lap or more down as the latter stages went on, which triggered carnage, which triggered the safety car, which triggered the red flag, which was a blessing for Vettel considering the race leader at this stage was on tires way past their best, and with the rule book, you were allowed to change tires during the red flag period for a fresh new set of the Pirelli soft compounds. Well, soft compounds, super soft compounds, whichever choice works for you. In this case, Vettel went with a new set of super softs, which was again a blessing for Vettel, and was very much needed to stay afloat maintaining the race lead, which he did and won. For Alonso and Button, they had to contend with 2nd and 3rd on the podium, respectively. But then we hit Montreal, where it is here in this race, the most infamous one of the bunch when discussing the 2011 F1 season for numerous reasons. One of those reasons being that the 2011 Canadian Grand Prix remains to this day as the longest race ever in Formula One history. Another reason? Jenson Button was the talk of the town. In Button's case, this very race for him is best summed up in one word: chaotic. From getting into it with Lewis Hamilton in the very early stages, to tangling with Fernando Alonso, to a drive-through penalty, to making the most pit stops more than anyone else in the field that day. 6 visits to the pits, if I'm not mistaken. And you would have thought that chances of winning or even getting on the podium was long gone for JB, again with all those factors. Drive-through penalty and making the most pit stops out of anyone in the field with 6 visits to the pits. But as the latter stages went on, Button moved his way through the traffic in tricky conditions, might I add, given the track was damp in the late stages. And then, would you believe it, found himself on course for a podium finish with a few laps to go. And with 2 laps to go, was gaining and catching the race leader, Vettel. And on the last lap, a miracle presented itself.
Jenson Button driving for his life, driving for the victory. Has Vettel got what it takes to hold him off?
I think Vettel's got wide.
Yeah,
he's got wide.
He turned in too late. He got the tyres. Button leads the Grand Prix. And Jenson Button, after an awful afternoon with so many things going wrong for him, leads this amazing Canadian Grand Prix. Jenson Button into the pit straight. He wins a brilliant race. It's a sensational drive for Button. What a victory.
Guys, that was a hell of a race. A hell of a race. Thank you so much. Fantastic win. We deserve that after the race we've had, so thank you guys so much. Oh, it's been a long time coming.
And by no question, one of his greatest drives / comebacks in his career, Jenson Button, despite all the odds and circumstances stacked against him, pulled through the messy, very chaotic Canadian Grand Prix and took home the winner's trophy. And had set the fastest lap for good measure. His first win of the 2011 season so far. 7 races in. As things stand, 7 races in already, Button sits in second place behind Vettel in the championship standings, albeit with plenty of work to do. 60 points behind. Valencia then, for the Grand Prix of Europe, was a quiet race for JB. Started 6th and finished 6th. Then Silverstone happened. Button was on course for a good amount and a decent score of points, but when he came in for one of his stops, his right front wasn't secured on tightly, and thus the right front was loose, leaving Button with no other choice but to park up. At least McLaren still walked out of Silverstone with 12 points in the bag, given Hamilton wheeled his way to a 4th place finish, albeit the hard way. In the case of Hamilton, things did improve as he went on to dominate and win the German Grand Prix. But in the case of Jenson Button, once again misfortune crashed down on him, and much like in Silverstone, had to park up and retire shortly past the halfway stage, following a hydraulics problem. But now we come into the next race after that, which was the Hungarian Grand Prix, a race in which Button is no stranger to sealing the top step when you recall his stellar win back in 2006, just 5 years previously. Fast forward the clock 5 years later, in this being his 200th Grand Prix. Button made the most of it, leading the second most laps, driving in similar conditions as it was in the 2006 edition of the Hungarian Grand Prix. It was damp. Yet, these are the sort of weather conditions Jenson thrives on when the precise opportune time represents itself. And sure enough, Button went on to win. Now at this stage, second win of 2011. However, Button had plenty of catching up to do still if he was to put up a fight for a championship against Vettel, as JB is at this stage down by exactly 100 points from the championship leader, who is still Seb. Obviously, given how much of a, like I said at the very beginning of this presentation, how much of a rocket ship the RB7 was in 2011, and given the fact that Seb was a beast on the track for both qualifying and race trim. And at Spa for the Belgian Grand Prix, prime example. Seb set pole in qualifying, led 32 of the 44 laps run, and ran away with it, walking off with the dub. Behind him sits Button, who crossed the line in 3rd. His drive from 13th to 3rd in this race proves it's not where you start, it's where you finish. And more to it, it ain't over until it's over. Getting rid of those prime tire compounds in the late stages paid off, and it paid big dividends for Jenson Button, with, again, like I've said earlier, 13th at the start to 3rd on the podium at the finish. In Monza, a quiet but clean race for JB, having started 3rd and moved up 1 spot greater to a 2nd place result. But in the standings, Button moved to 3rd, behind Alonso by 5 points. But both were well off where Seb was, as the gap was 112 in the case of Fernando Alonso. But for Button, 117 points being the difference between Button and the points leader, Sebastian Vettel. Right, onwards to Marina Bay then. Button got yet another podium finish of a runners-up result, finishing behind Vettel yet again, who won yet again. But all the same, Button keeps up with the consistency. But even so, at this stage, the championship was now thrown out the window since Seb needed an extra point to secure the title, which is exactly what happened in the next race in Japan. Both Button and Vettel found themselves starting alongside each other on the grid on the front row, though it was Vettel on the pole position. And when the lights went out, Button saw a gap, but then it was firmly closed off when Seb shut the door on the run to the first corner on the first lap. Close call, but luckily both of the drivers kept it clean, though it was Button with the last laugh. I say this considering he was the one who led the most laps in this 2011 edition of the Japanese Grand Prix in Suzuka, using his tires and precise strategy to perfection to lead for 30 of the 53 laps out front. And when the checkers flew, Jenson Button ended up victorious, while at the same time setting the fastest lap along the way. Post-race, you would have thought that it was Jenson who won the championship and not Sebastian. But speaking of whom, Vettel with his third place finish sealed the Drivers' Championship right then and there, and became the youngest Formula One World Champion to win it for 2 years in a row. A record that still stands to this day as of this recording. Even though the Drivers' Championship was sealed in the bag, best of the rest was still there for the taking. As things stand, heading into Korea, Button moves to second place in the championship standings, 8 points ahead of the Flying Fernando, aka Fernando Alonso. Speaking of the Korean Grand Prix, yet again a quiet race from Jenson's point of view. Sure, he had battles here and there with one driver or another, but not much that was interesting took place from, again, Jenson's end of the stick. Didn't capitalize on the podium finish in this one, ultimately ending the day in P4. P4 for car number 4. A positive to take away from was that Button finished ahead of his nearest challenger for second place in the standings, which Fernando Alonso mustered 5th when the checkers flew. This meant that the gap cushion now was 10 adrift between the pair going into the next race, which was the Indian Grand Prix. And for that one, Button finished 8 seconds behind Vettel at the checkered flag, with Vettel winning. Again, Button with P2, Alonso with P3. Next, we hit the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix for the penultimate round. Button's car was having teething troubles in this one with KERS, which is again Kinetic Energy Recovery System. Yet, despite that going on, he still wheeled home yet another podium finish with 3rd place. With a 10 points gap ahead of 3rd place Alonso in the standings, work was yet to be 100% complete to cap off the year as best of the rest. In other words, obviously there was still more racing left to go, which in that sense came down to the last race of the 2011 season in Brazil. And for the 19th and final round, center staged in Brazil, Button did his part to keep Alonso at arm's length for as long as he did. But knowing second place in the standings was still there for the taking, Alonso wasn't going to go down without a fight. And Button's result of 3rd place at the line, he did indeed stay ahead of Alonso to clinch 2nd place in the championship, nabbing those 15 crucial points as far as best of the rest was concerned. To add salt to the wound, Alonso was demoted to 4th in the final standings, given Mark Webber's win at the end of the day propelled the Aussie up to 3rd place in the standings. The gap between Button, Webber and Alonso was this. For Button and Webber, the gap was 12 points. For Button and Alonso, the gap was 13 points. For the constructors, Red Bull won that by a country mile, 153 points separating them from runners-up McLaren. Red Bull with a score of 650 points. Compare that to McLaren's tally of 497 points. For Button, it was second place in the Drivers' Championship. For McLaren, it was second place in the Constructors' Championship. As of this recording, McLaren finishing second in the Constructors' standings in 2011 was the last time they've gone that high in that table. Of course, as of recent years. Last time McLaren won the Constructors was 1998, but that is besides the point. Point being, the 2009 World Champion put in the numbers during the course of the 2011 season, and when Button delivered, doing his part, finishing in the points on a very consistent basis. And furthermore, caps off the second half with nothing but top fives on race trim. 2 of those being race wins in that span, 8 of them being podium finishes. Again, during the second half of the 2011 season. From round 11 at the Hungaroring to round 19 at Interlagos. Diving into the numbers, Jenson Button's stats from the 2011 season look like this. 3 wins, 12 podiums, 3 front row starts, which neither of them were pole positions, clocking in 3 fastest laps, leading a small portion of 88 laps out front, with an average start of 4.5 and an average finish rate of a 4.9, aside from 2 did not finishes. 1 being a pit stop error at Silverstone, and the other coming at the Nürburgring following reliability woes. But all in all, solid numbers, solid season. 2011 marked the 3rd time Button ranked inside the top 3 in points in his F1 career. The only time in that sense in McLaren colors. It was to be the last time Button ranked inside the top 3 in points in the standings, considering in the years that follow, Button was either having bad luck on the track or bad luck with the car itself he was behind the wheel of. Either way, there were times he did rank inside the points. In other words, there were races where he did finish inside the points nonetheless. That or his finishing results were kinda meh in the midfield or just inside the top 10. But those are stories for another time. In other words, as of right now, this is all there is. I'll leave it at that. But I will say this one last thing before closing off the presentation. If wondering the points difference between Button and Hamilton at the end of the 2011 season, those two are separated by a 43-point margin. Button with a score of 270 points. Hamilton with his score tally of 227 points. First time ever Hamilton had been outscored by his teammate, ranking P5 in the final standings. And I cannot even tell you how many times he and Felipe Massa came to blows during this particular season. But once again, that's a story for another day. But other than that, there you have it, a rundown on Jenson Button's solid 2011 season. Mr. Consistency, if you will, but nonetheless, if you've liked what you've seen, click that like button to show this video love and support. If you've really liked what you've seen, hit that red subscribe button so that way you will stay up to date with more Formula 1 and other motorsport content. And to those who are not yet subscribed and are quite possibly doing so right this moment, and to those who are already subscribers to the channel but haven't done so at this point, it's recommended you turn on that notification bell so that way by doing so, you will immediately be notified on a new video the split second it comes out. But until then, I, Turn 4 Productions, signing off the mic, as always. And until next time, and further notice, peace out, stay safe, and have a good one.